as I exist over the last 12 to 15 months, I got a lot of questions about race and the racial conflict, or race and racism and those things. And one of the conversations that I had was with a classmate from college who was concerned about how we were talking about and dealing with the issues of race, racial tension, racial conflict, racism, and discussing them in our church body. And then I got a phone call from a Pastor Phil Merton, who said, hey, there's this young lady in Arizona who is I think you might want to talk to, named Ruth Jefferson. And so I got a hold of Ruth, and we started talking every other day, it seemed, about this current climate of racial conflict and what's going on in our society. And what we both recognized, that there was a void in all of that of where is Christ in the conversation, right? And so it made me start thinking about what is our keynote for today in a broader scale, but I think it works for our conversation. How do you listen, love, and lead in a time of racial conflict? That's the question I have before us today, and I don't have all the answers. I'm looking to you for help with this. How do you listen, love, and lead in a time of conflict? Could be the statement itself, right? I mean, that could be anything, but we're dealing with a time in our country where there is obvious racial conflict. So to make it specific to that, listen. When I think of listen in the Bible, the first name that comes to mind is a guy whose name means God hears. Samuel. His mother prayed, God heard, and she gave her and her husband Samuel. Samuel then grew up in the church. He knew who God was. I'm going to assume this because God doesn't tell me outright, but he was a believer in God. And yet when he heard God's voice, he didn't recognize it. He heard God's voice and he wondered, what do I do? So he was able to hear, but he wasn't able to listen to obey because he didn't know that voice. How do you listen in a time of racial conflict? What makes it hard to listen? For Samuel, it was the lack of having heard the voice before. It's a new voice. How do you listen? Maybe it's a new problem. How do you listen? Is it easy to listen to somebody when you're angry? I don't think it is, at least not for me. When I get angry, I'm kind of in myself. I'm in my fight or flight mode. I'm in my defense mechanism. I'm angry. And you might be saying some really good things that should calm me down on a regular moment, but I'm angry. And if I get angry, eventually my anger turns to mad. And then when anger turns to mad, I get to that point of being competitive, and now I want to destroy. So then I go to win. I don't go to settle. I'm not going for neutral. I'm not going for let's try this again nicely. I'm going for it's you versus me. I'm going to win and you're going to hurt. That's what anger does to me. That's why I don't like being in an anger spot. I don't put up with stress in my life because I realized early on as a child that it leads me to spots where I do things that are hurtful to others and to me. And so I stay out of the anger space. But when you're angry, you don't listen. When you're hurt, so not even the angry, you're not the angry one, you're the one that's hurt. How well do you listen when you're hurt? Or does that block some of the conversation that you would like to have? And so my first question to us today, and I want us to just talk. I mean, if you're online, shoot your chats in there. You can unplug it and talk to us for the next 3 minutes. Let's talk about how do you listen to somebody when you're hurt or you're angry? What can we do to help that? Go ahead, let's talk. Because I just did 15 minutes before. I'm not going to spend a whole half hour speaking to you. How do we do that? How do you listen when you're hurt or you're angry? Yeah, Lance.
You kind of said it, but you're up in your own feelings a lot of times. Now, are you asking the question like, what are some solutions, or just how you?
What are some solutions?
Solutions to it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do think you have to get into a place that's where your mind can get settled a little bit, taking a deep breath, those kinds of things. Just, when you're hot, trying to just, I guess, settle your brain, I guess would be a way of saying that.
Okay. Throttle down, settle your brain. Yeah, Emily?
Bring God into the situation with prayer.
Okay, bring God in with prayer. And it's, so some of you do that almost, your prayer life is probably, exponentially better than mine, but you bring it in with prayer. You don't start trying to solve the problem yourself. You say, okay, God, let me give it to you. And that's one way, hopefully, to do the thing of throttling down, because you're giving it to God. What else can we do? Amy?
Take a break and come back to it when you're both in a better place.
Okay. So now, in this time of racial conflict, can we take a break? I'm going to spend the next 5 hours, I'm going to spend the next 5 days, next 5 months with just black folks. Sorry, I need a break. Can I do that? My wife says no. I'm going to just go to myself and be with my own group, that my silo of information that I gather from Facebook and Twitter and whatever else that's out there. And sometimes you can't throttle down because they won't let you. It just keeps coming. I mean, if it was just George Floyd that died this year, or that last year, we might say by now we would have dealt with and we would have processed and worked through it. But it seemed like it was every month, every other month, there was something else that wasn't going right. And it wasn't just the killing or death. It was something in the politics, stuff in our, and all of a sudden we had the virus that hit. It was just a year of chaos, seemingly all the time. And we couldn't throttle down. Because as soon as you throttle down, someone else lit another fire to get you going again. But you can always pray. Daniel was a captive in a foreign land. He could always pray. You can always go to God. David was running from Saul. He could always pray. If Jesus is about to suffer for the sins of the world, you could always pray. Yeah, Jacqueline?
I was going to say you can use that energy. You can use that energy for something else, and you can turn it into your own feelings, like, when you're angry and you can't calm down and the world seems to be against you, you can do something positive with someone else until you calm down. You can stop when you want to, stop and think, and then you know this feeling is yours, it's changed.
Okay, yeah, so just some redirection of that energy, of that, I'll call it passion. For lack of a better word, I'll call it passion. That anger comes out of a passion of whatever. Turn that passion to something that's positive, that is something that you can control when you stop or how you stop, whatever, and not letting the world be the thing that throws you. Terry, one more, and then we'll move on to the next section.
Well, just to keep that undercurrent of love, that you, and just flat out say, I love your brother, but this and just so they know that Christian foundation is present even in the midst of that heated whatever issue.
Thank you. A couple of online thoughts. One was pray through it, take time to distance myself and see things from their perspective. I like that perspective piece, that listening from their perspective. And then the second one is, it's so easy to fire off in anger. I need to walk away and think and turn it over to God. Pray about it first. Wonderful thoughts. Let's focus on that one for a minute, your perspective. Why is it hard to see from their perspective? What?
I haven't lived that experience.
Okay, I haven't lived that experience. What else? Well, because you haven't lived it. You know what? I thought we have 5 children. I thought that having a child was the easiest thing I'd ever done in my life. Now, my wife might differ, but our experiences were different. And I would never have that experience. So I'm like, I don't know what all the big deal is, all that crying about pain and stuff. It was easy. My perspective, I could never get into that moment and say, this is how bad it was. So what it felt like. And then I could never experience the true joy and love of going, this is how great it was. This is what it felt like. Because I just can't be in that space. So the experience. What else makes it hard to have that perspective of someone else? Or hear that perspective genuinely, objectively, reasonably? What do you think about your perspective? I'm sorry, Mariah, go ahead.
Pride is often in the way.
Pride, right? Because I think my perspective is right. And if your perspective is different than my perspective, then we can't both be right. We can't both be legitimate. We can't both be genuine. It can't be that you're right and I'm right. So to see it from your perspective automatically puts me questioning my own, and we don't want to do that because we've grown up and we've learned a certain way to do it. Sorry, the forks and spoons and knives go in this drawer in the house, not that drawer. If you're doing something different, you're wrong. Blame your parents. You know, this is how you're supposed to wear your scarf. You wear it the other way, you're wrong. This is how you write your A, with the point, not the circular. If you don't, it's wrong. That's how I do it. And so there's this perspective issue that it's hard to see. It's hard to see sometimes. It's hard to do because maybe, unfortunately, we don't really care. We may not truly care about someone else's hurt because it's not my hurt. How many of you have ever in your life made a joke, a comment that was racially insensitive at best? And who do we do it about? The person that's not us. Or that we're not connected with. So you better not say a black joke in front of me, but a good Jewish joke, I can bring it. You better not say a joke about short black guys, but you know, if he's a little light skinned, bring it. And so because it's not our hurt, we can sometimes not even care enough to see it from their perspective because it's not us. That's why so many men will have said at some point in time a joke about females that they think is funny in that male group because it's not us. Or that we'll pick on blondes instead of brunettes because it's not us. They'll pick on black and not white, or Latino and not Jewish, or Asian and not, because it's not us. And we'll make comments and they're funny within the group that is not that, but it's still not right. And so I think my first suggestion is listen for their perspective, listen for what their hurt is, and let their hurt be their hurt. Let their pain be their pain. My mother and father are both in heaven now, but they went through stuff that I didn't have to go through as an African-American male born in '74. Last night, Joanne was telling us about her experience growing up and how even back then, Kenosha was a place of racial struggle and divisiveness. And so instead of me telling Joanne, no, Joanne, that can't be because I've been through Kenosha. It's not as bad as Milwaukee. No, I got to say that's Joanne's experience. Let Joanne's experience stand as Joanne's experience. Listen to it. And I can't say, well, it's not mine, so it can't be legitimate racism because it didn't affect me. Or the hurt you have, that can't be real. Because I'm not feeling hurt. This year, I was taking my daughter back to prep in Watertown, and there was this truck that went by that had a Confederate flag on there. It was out there, and my daughter said, "Dad, does that offend you?" And I said, "No." Because when I was growing up, I liked the Dukes of Hazzard. I wanted the General Lee. The flag affects me differently because that's not. But for her age and that time, it triggers them. That's the word. I found that out about a few days. It triggers them. That flag triggers them. And I'm like, that doesn't trigger me. That doesn't mean that their triggered response is not legitimate. It's just their response. And so you have to get out of yourself and say, okay, that's how you feel. Not gonna deny that feeling. Let's talk through it with Christ in mind. Pray, help yourself throttle down. And then if you can, separate the emotion from the moment of reality and then work through some of that. But so that's the first thing. Listen, I pray that we're doing more listening now between cultures because of the racial tension. I pray that we're doing more reading It's not technically listening, but if you read some books of past individuals, you are listening to them through book. So I'm going to suggest for those of you that want to do some research, Voices, The Souls of Black Folk by W.B. Du Bois. I think he's a great author to read to kind of get a base for it. You could read so much of Martin and Malcolm and get a good flavor for what's going on in their hearts and minds. But read some of those materials. Read some authors that aren't part of your cultural group, because it comes to that lens. That's a perspective. You can do that in your own home, and it's you engaging without the pressure of it being combative. You can always close the book, but at least you're trying to listen to other perspectives. Okay. The next one, love. How do you love? How do you love those who hate you? I am called by God to love the person who is openly, outwardly racist. I'm called to love the person who carries the flag, who wears a hat, who has a chant. I'm called to love the person who is not me. How do you do that? How do you love the person that you know if you turned your back, they'd call you all kinds of names and treat you differently because of your skin color? How do you do that? Isn't that what Christ did for us? We carried the banner of Satan. We carried that flag. It didn't have the same look, but we carried the flag of his enemy. And then sometimes when we turn our back on him, we call him all kinds of names. We treat him in such a bad way. And yet he said, I love you. Love you so much to die on the cross for you. And then he says we ought to love one another. And he gives us examples of the Good Samaritan loving, of him forgiving Peter who denied him, and him who loving those who are mocking and ridiculing from the cross. So if we're Christians and called to be like Christ, the answer to the question of how do you love in a time of racial conflict is you love like Christ loved. And it's not about your feelings of being hurt. Sorry. Your racist, your condescending comments, your actions can't make me love you less. Come here, let me hug you. Let me love you. Call me a name again. Let me love you some more. Let me share the love of Christ that was shared with me with you. And that is so hard to do. And I thank God that he didn't call me to do it for the world, because it's hard to do for one person. But showing love doesn't mean you okay sin. Showing love doesn't mean you bypass the problem. Showing love, like Jesus showed love to us, is let me see if I can't do something for you to help you get out of that hate that you're in. I was blessed when I was at Wisco to do a number of mission trips, and went down to South Carolina a few times. And one time we got to stay with a couple, and I won't, just nice couple. And we sat in his living room, and he showed our family, I think it was a musket from like the Civil War. It was old. And he sat there and came nearly to tears, thinking about the fact that he, as a Wales member, most of his life is sitting in his house with a Black Wales pastor, and we are friends. Not that he was ever racist. I'm not saying he was racist ever. I don't know his history background, but living in South Carolina, that probably didn't happen a whole lot. Where the cultures got together and you're able to call someone of another culture a friend. Where you could worship together and eat, break bread together and be friends. And he sat there, and it was so moving to have him be moved by that moment, because for me, it's kind of what I do. I preach to white people all the time. I have white in-laws, I have white friends. Neither cultural thing isn't an issue, but for him, it was like, this is so moving. That love was there. You know, for you, Just a little pause here. In what way can you show love to those who are right now peddling in hate? How can you show love? I'm gonna give you another 2-3 minutes, maybe online questions to come in. How do you show love to someone who's peddling in hate? Mickey?
Kind of goes along with what Terry said earlier, base it all in love, but also just maybe trying to find some common ground and start from there.
Find some common ground and start from there, but all based in love, the reason you're doing it. Yeah, Amy?
I think also just loving someone enough to know that that's, again, their perspective. And whatever they're saying or however they're treating you is their perspective and whatever baggage they carry.
Ooh.
And so loving them enough to continue to talk.
I like that part about baggage. That there may be some baggage there that they have not even unwrapped themselves about what's going on in their lives. That there may be some conflict that happened that was a part of their lives, but they didn't recognize that they're still carrying around. They're like, wow, I'm gonna love you enough to just love you to listen to you, even as you struggle with this. Hopefully they're struggling with it, even as you have this as an issue. You know, I mean, I think if I were molested as a young boy, I'd feel it hard to not hate those who molested me, or that whole category. If I was driven out of a city by a group, I probably would hate that group. If I had been hosed off of a playground by water hose and chased by dogs, I might hate those who I thought were responsible for that. If I lost my job to somebody who didn't seem to deserve it, I might hate that group for having lost my job. There may be a whole lot of baggage that we don't know on first glance about why they have this anger. So I'm gonna love you enough to listen and to help you unpack it. And then I'm gonna love you enough to show you another side of this cultural group. I'm not gonna lash out back at you with hate because that feeds hate. I'm gonna show you love. I had a couple of thoughts I just wanted to share with you that. Why does God say love your neighbor? Does he say love your neighbor because your neighbor is perfect? Love your neighbor because your neighbor can get you stuff, because they can watch your dog. Love your neighbor because they'll cut your grass. No, he says love your neighbor. That's it. He didn't say love your neighbor, the ones that don't hate you. Love your neighbor. And so we don't get to pick and choose which neighbors to love. That was obvious in the Good Samaritan story. You don't get to pick and choose. You see a neighbor, love your neighbor. And if you see a hurting neighbor, love your hurting neighbor. And then you do that by finding out the hurt. And then finally, love that Jesus to die for our sins. Okay, last one, leading in time of racial conflict. And this is where it really comes down to conflict in general. Moses was where I went for this thought about leading during conflict. And the phrase that I've used for myself in the last 2 years is don't hit the rock. You know what I mean? When you're trying to lead in a positive way and there is frustration from whatever it is around you, sometimes you want to hit the rock. God says, listen, love, but you want to hit and drive instead of leading and loving and with listening. And so you get frustrated, you get angry, and like Moses, you hit the rock. And what can you expect when you're leading hurting people? Or when you're around hurting, what can you expect when you're around hurting people?
That hurt's gonna come out, and it may not come out and directed even at what was hurting them. It can come out all over the place. It may come out at you.
Yeah, the hurt's gonna spill out. The hurt's gonna spill out. It might spill out at you, but it's not about you. The hurt may spill out and hurt them. The hurt may spill out and it'd be just some random thing that you kind of go, I don't know why. You ever ask somebody a question about why they're angry and they go, I don't know? Why you're crying? I don't know. Why are you sad? The hurt spills out. When you're leading hurt people, then that's going to affect you a little bit. So then once again, we need to be in the word of God, be prayed up, and we need to have our center, our core ready, because it's going to spill out. All of us are hurting somewhere. We're sinful human beings. So in this moment of racial conflict, none of us is innocent of not having some kind of bias. Whether that affects how you treat someone or not, or how you've allowed someone to be treated or not, I'm not going to judge your life, but we all have bias, and so that affects how we deal with people on a regular basis. Some of us have gotten by that a whole lot better than others. I tell the story. I thought I was racially awesome and good because I had gone to school at an all-black school in St. Marcus in Milwaukee, and then I went to an all-white school pretty much in Watertown, Wisconsin. I figured out the major races, and then 9/11 happened, and I found myself having a bias against those who looked like those who ran those planes into the towers. That was a racial thing for me. They had a base on something, but it doesn't make it right for me to want to avoid that place. It was a street or two called Little Deli in Queens that I started avoiding going down or talking to people. Before that was all I did was talk to people on the street. But because I was feeling some kind of way, I was hurting because I was hurting. I wasn't leading and loving in kindness and love. So for us, we're trying to lead. That hurt's going to spill out. How do we deal with that? Well, Moses, unfortunately, hit the rock, and he couldn't go into the promised land. You and I don't want to hit the rock. We want to listen to God and lead him that way. What are some things that we can do as we are hurting, or we are leading the hurting in this time? What can we do? How can we avoid letting the hurt spill out from us? What can we do? Anybody have any thoughts? Yeah, Sue.
Don't walk in front of them, but with them.
Okay. She said, don't walk in front of them, but with them. Yeah, walk alongside. And you know what we call ourselves, the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. You know what that means, right? Walking together. Walking with them, walking together. Wonderful phrase. Thank you. And that doesn't mean, I think what it means is that we're willing to engage in them with their struggle and their hurt, walking with them. What else can we do? There's a thought from online. Thank you for sharing this. It's building relationships. You can't make an impact or really show love if you don't know that person. How many? And this is maybe typical this is typical of Milwaukee. It may be not everywhere. But you can't find too many places in Milwaukee where there is a cross-section of races. Maybe schools, high schools, do it primarily. But you go to a bar, it's usually a white bar or a black bar. You go to a restaurant, it's frequented by this group or that group. It's rare. I mean, it happens, but it's rare that you have a cross-section of people that attend the same gatherings. We have festivals that are divided by cultural things, which is wonderful to experience culture. We have things that are divided. Walking with them means, I'm going to walk with you. Building relationships means I'm going to get to know you. I'm going to go to that place. I'm going to go to this restaurant. I'm going to enjoy the people that are around. I'm going to talk to my coworker as a friend, not just as a coworker. Building relationships. Jacqueline.
Make a list about the many ways to say I love you, such as simple things like when you go to someone's house and they take off their shoes, you can take off your shoes. It's the same thing, just following suit.
Yeah. So being willing to engage in their cultural or their moment as they are, not as you're used to. I've got a few points I want to share with you before I close up and move to the next thing. But here's what I think you can expect from people who are hurting when you're leading them. There will be much complaining about the past. Isn't that happening when we're hurting? That we complain about the past, about what happened to us. And some folks blame their grandparents, their parents. Some folks blame the man, Big Gov, Big Brother's watching. Every president that I know has blamed the previous administration for things being bad. we blame the past when we're hurting or when things aren't going well. they will be romanticizing about the past sometimes. It was better then. Remember the good old days in America? Back when we had separate water fountains? Remember the good old days in America? When we had separate schools? Remember the good old days in America? And I tell you, for some of them, it may have been really good, but for the others, it may not have been good at all. So you romanticize the past. You think about the things that were positive for you. And there will be future, there will be the fear of the future. Because if right now it's comfortable and the past was so great, why am I going into this future that might give me more struggle, more conflict? And so you have this fear of the future when you're dealing with that is hurting. That was the Israelites, right? You took us out of this great place called Egypt, where we had access to all the great foods, to a place where we're going to die in the desert. Where are you leading us, Moses? Should have left us there to die. As if that was so great, as they were grumbling and complaining and fighting with the guards, with the soldiers in Egypt. But they romanticized it, and the guy had a fear of the future. And then finally, there will be residual hurt. If there's anybody here that's 90, thank God for you being 90. But I'm gonna expect that you were raised in a climate that had things that hurt you when you were young that I can't even identify with. That you were raised in a climate that had racial divisions that are no longer acceptable. I've got to allow that to be your life and not assume that you won't misuse a word or phrase. When I was 18, graduating from high school, one of my classmates' grandmothers came through the line, and I had done something that caused her granddaughter to have a scar on her head. She's fine. She still thinks right and everything, but her grandmother came to the line and said, "So you're the colored boy that hurt my granddaughter?" She was older than I don't even know how old she was, but she was a grandmother already. And I just said, "Yes, ma'am." Because that was her way of referring to me that in her mind probably wasn't even offensive. Because she didn't use the other words. And so I've got to allow for people who are raised or, okay, here's the space. I can teach you better. We can grow to know each other, but I'm not going to assume that it's always because you're being malicious. And because of how you were raised, what happened to you, you'll have residual hurt that may spill out on me, even though I didn't do anything to you. And so then finally, how should we lead? Last 3 points. One, Emily started off with it, going to God. Prayer is this divine thing that he allows us to be a part of it. And we don't know how it always works and when it's going to work, but he says, pray. You come to me all who are weary and I will give you rest. So go to God. Secondly, he says, I'm saying calling out sin. Jesus called out sin when he saw it. Now, he didn't always dwell on that sin. With the woman at the well, he didn't dwell on that sin. With the money changers, he didn't dwell on that sin, but he called it out when he saw it. So we can call out sin and not just say it's okay, go ahead and be a racist, or you nice little racist. No, you nice little abuser of power. No, we know you don't want to avoid, but calling out sin is fine. And then finally, don't hit the rock. Don't let it get to you to the point where you're not serving God in love, where you're serving God in frustration and anger and your own hurt, and it spills out on those you're trying to serve. So those are the thoughts I wanted to share with you today about this subject, and I could go for another 10 minutes at least, but I guess I can't. That is the time. I'm over my time probably a little bit, but I just wanted to say thanks for having me. Thanks for being here. Thanks for involving yourself. And I pray that God will lead you to listen, love, and lead during the time of any conflict with him first. Amen. All right, so I went over my time. I was making up for the worship service. Had to get that 5 minutes back. It is now 11:06, and we have breakout group A. I'm going to hand it over to Ruth, who is still bundled up because she's from Arizona. And even though we're inside with heat, we have heat here at Wisco. She's still bundled up. But Ruth.
Can everyone hear me?
Nope.
First of all, thank you, Pastor Robinson, for that message. Also, what I'm up here really to say at this point is to help you to get to the classrooms for breakout session A.